Hello, everyone. It's Kate with the Thrive with Kate podcast, and I'm here with Dr. Michael Biamonte, who's the founder of Biamonte Center for Clinical Nutrition. He's also the co-creator of Biocybernetics, which is an unprecedented computer software program that's able to study blood work, mineral tests, and many other lab tests to determine exactly where your body is imbalanced initially. It was initially designed for aerospace purposes, which I'm excited to get into how that translates. So Dr. Michael Biamonte, he was a practitioner for over 30 years. And in that, he is listed in the Directory of Distinguished Americans for his research in nutrition and psychology. We're going to get into a number of different topics today, from supplementation to testing to Candida to pH balance and microbiome. So welcome, Dr. Biamonte. I appreciate you being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So let's just start with the beginning of this software program that's able to study blood work, mineral tests, and other lab tests, and the need for testing right now.
There's a tremendous need for testing, and the more popular that supplements get in our culture, the more this holds true. Because one thing I learned from working in this field is that if you don't know what you're doing, you can cause imbalances in your body. The vitamin companies want to put a hit out on me when I start talking about these things, because they want people just buying supplements freely. And it's not such a good idea, because I learned the hard way that if you take a lot of supplements and you don't know what you're doing, you can further or create further imbalances in your body and actually make yourself worse. If you take the right supplements, you can get great results. But if you do the wrong ones, you can make yourself worse. And you've got to know what your existing balance is. And that's where Biocybernetics started. Biocybernetics was founded by Dr. Robert Santoro, who unfortunately isn't with us anymore. He was an aerospace physiologist at Grumman. He's actually the man who developed the life support systems on the lunar module. And he had an idea of developing a software program that could analyze the test results of the astronauts while they were in the space station in order to adjust their nutrition precisely. Because there's a few things that happen when you're in extended space. And one of the things is that you have a big calcium problem. You lose calcium from your bone, and you also have a tendency to lose a lot of nitrogen, so your muscle mass breaks down. And he wanted to be able to give the astronauts the precise nutrition so that they wouldn't run into any of these problems. And that's how he developed Biocybernetics. I joined him after they had kicked off the project, and I worked with him at Grumman for many years. And what we did was essentially we developed a Fortran computer software program that essentially had all the data that we could get our hands on nutrition, all set up in a table-driven fashion. Because when you have a table-driven software program, you don't have to rewrite the program when you find something new. You just insert a table or move tables around. So we had people like Dr. Jim Seema, Ken Brockman, many nutritionists back in those days. This is like the early 80s we're talking. We had them all contributing information, and what the computer is able to do is run a simulation of your own body. So what it does, and that goes from your endocrine system, your immune system, your mitochondrial function, everything. It just runs a simulation of your body based on the lab tests and the data that you give it. And from that, it's then able to calculate what nutrition you need or where your nutrition's imbalanced. The computer has a separate module for supplements, and a doctor who uses the system can put any brand he wants. If he wants Metagenics, if he wants standard process, whatever he wants, it can go into that supplement module, and that's what the computer draws from to prescribe what the patient needs. And after many years working on this, we took it private. And it was in that setting that I discovered the issues where people would supplement incorrectly, because we had people coming in who were taking all these supplements, and when we tested them, we found out that they were actually imbalancing themselves. And I can go through this. I could actually write a book on this subject by itself, but for every nutrient had a synergists and antagonists. So if you take vitamin C, for instance, vitamin C needs certain enzymes to work in order to be oxidized. One of the key enzymes is ascorbic acid oxidase, which is copper-based. So that means that you mobilize copper to utilize vitamin C. So if you take massive amounts of vitamin C for a long time, you continue to mobilize and draw your copper reserves out, and you cause a copper deficiency.
Yeah.
See, vitamin C will do the same thing with calcium. Vitamin C acts like a chelator of calcium, and it actually leaches it out of your tissues. And if you get into excessive vitamin C for a long period of time, it can leach the calcium off your bone. So we can take any one nutrient, and I could explain to you how we can imbalance others.
Yeah.
But this is how I discovered and how I got into studying the biome. Is
Mhm.
we had a certain amount of like a small percentage, maybe it was 25% of the people who we were using this program with, who had bizarre reactions when we gave them the vitamins, and none of us could figure out why they were reacting this way. They seemed to be having the opposite reaction that you would expect them to have, and we ended up finding out was all these people had Candida. And this was in 1984. I didn't really know what Candida was back then. I thought it was some fad from California. I had no idea what in God's name Candida was. And then I started studying it and I started seeing how Candida as a microorganism would interact with different nutrients, and it could react adversely because there are some nutrients which actually feed Candida. And a brief list of those would be some things you'd never expect, like vitamin D, coenzyme Q10, B
Wow.
complex, copper as a mineral, iron as a mineral, actually feed Candida and make it spread. This is why when you look at the indications, if you buy, let's say, a nystatin, or you buy ketoconazole, and you get that little insert, like 1 or 2 page insert thing that's telling you about the drug. When you read about how the drug works, you find out that nystatin works by blocking the Candida's ability to absorb iron, and ketoconazole works by blocking the Candida's ability to absorb vitamin D. So when you start pulling the string on this, you start seeing the interactions of how these nutrients actually would help this pathogen they're trying to get rid of. When I started to understand what Candida was, and it made sense to me why these people were reacting the way they did, I was so naive. I told the patients, go to your medical doctor, tell him you have Candida, get cured, and then come back and we'll put you back on the program and you should be fine. Well, the barrage of phone calls that I got from people like, the doctor says everybody has Candida, or the doctor says there's no such thing as Candida, or the doctor says he doesn't know what to do about Candida. All of these, uh, this is how naive I was. So I told them. Now, at the time, my practice was in Manhattan. So I was
Mhm.
very fortunate to have Dr. Robert Atkins only a few blocks away, and my good friend Dr. Ronald Hoffman a few blocks away. And these probably were the first two functional medical doctors that we had in the whole field. And we
Yeah.
throw in Leo Gallen and a couple of other people. So I told them, well, all right, I got it. I said, well, here, go to Dr. Atkins, go to Dr. Hoffman, and they should be able to help you. The calls I got back were much better. They said, well, they knew what you were talking about, and they agreed that I had Candida, and they put me on the diet and they put me on these medications, and I was better for a while, but then it all came back. And I said to myself, geez, I said, I have to figure this out. So I spent the next few years researching Candida and learning what the doctors were doing wrong. And one of the first things that I found was that Candida was very mutative, that it mutated very quickly when it was exposed to the same medication. So I bought all these textbooks on mycology and Candida, and I learned the first rule, and this is in my book. My book is called The Candida Chronicles, and I list a bunch of axioms and logics in the book that you can't break if you want to really cure yourself from Candida. The first thing I learned was that if you took the same medicine or botanical against Candida for 21 days or longer, Candida would start to mutate on day 21.
Wow.
It becomes drug resistive, not only against that medication, but just in general. So in other words, its species jumps. So in my practice, when we started this, all the people coming to us had Candida albicans who didn't know about Candida. All the people who had been self-treating or had been treated by other doctors for Candida had Candida glabrata and Candida tropicalis, which are more mutative advanced species. So that immediately showed me that I was on the right track, that people who were being treated consistently with the same antifungals every day, their Candida had mutated.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have Candida albicans anymore. They had Candida tropicalis or glabrata or one of the other more advanced species. So I came across the work of No MD, and he wrote a book called and I forgot his name, believe it or not, but he wrote a book called the Protocol for the Immune System. He talked about rotation of antifungals and antivirals. He pointed out that microorganisms develop a resistance, so you have to rotate the items. So we came up with a 4-day rotation of 4 different items. We got 4 botanicals that we thought were pretty good. We had patients start rotating them every 4 days, and we had unbelievable success. People were actually getting rid of the Candida, and it was staying away because it wasn't becoming drug resistant. Then we did work with the Great Smokies Lab. I don't know if you ever heard of them. Now they're called Genova Labs, which most people know about. Genova used to be called Great Smokies. They had some great staff there. Marty Lee was their director of research, and Marty allowed my patients to submit a stool sample for free every week for 6 weeks. We had 5 people who we did this with. And what we were watching was how the biome reacted to different treatments. So we gave these people probiotics. These are people who were missing. Their lactobacillus and bifidus came up negative all the time on their stool tests. So we were giving them all these expensive probiotics, and after 6 weeks, still came up negative. So then I got the idea. I said, let's give them antifungals for 6 weeks and do the study again. So we did that, and we gave them antifungals with the probiotic, and now the probiotics started to show up in the stool. Why? It's because the probiotics were being unseated by the Candida. The Candida was repelling them. And when we reduced the Candida load using the antifungal, now the probiotics were able to re-inoculate or stick again to the gut. That's why it was showing up in the stool samples now. So I learned from that you can't give probiotics in the beginning of a treatment. You have to reduce the Candida to a certain degree before probiotics will stick. So the inkling, unfortunately, in the business is you have Candida, take a probiotic. That's the first thing you do. Well, it's wrong because it's going to end up in the toilet. You might as well just open up the bottle and pour it right in the toilet. Don't bother swallowing it. It's not going to stick in your gut. You've got to lower your Candida first. Then we learned about the interaction between other organisms and Candida. We started to see a pattern. We started to see that the patients who had H. pylori and Candida at the same time were some of the most difficult to treat. And it's only been very recently that studies are coming out that actually are showing this and explaining why this is. These two organisms are just very compatible in how they stick to the lining of your gut, and it makes them very hard to unseat. And H. pylori also repels friendly bacteria. So if you have both of them, they're synergistic together. We saw Klebsiella and Citrobacter bacteria is also showing up consistently in people with Candida. Well, those are two microbes that suppress your intestinal immune response. So if you're doing any of the more modern tests, stool tests like the GI map or GI effects or any of those stool tests, we actually found a way to determine the presence of Candida when Candida doesn't show up. I'll tell you, this is really interesting. Candida is very difficult to get to culture in your stool because it doesn't grow in your intestinal tract in a uniform manner. This is the first thing you have to learn about Candida. When you're in your intestines, if you could walk around with a flashlight, you would not see Candida proliferate in an even uniform manner, like you were looking at moss growing up a building. Yeah. That doesn't happen. Candida grows in a very spotty, splotchy manner. So because of that, if your stool sample doesn't sit in contact with that particular area where the Candida is growing, it's going to miss it. It won't absorb the Candida and have it show up in your stool. Major problem with testing then, because there's so many doctors who take the stool test for face value, and if it says no Candida, they go, oh, you don't have no Candida. So that's it. If you're lucky enough on your stool test to have a microscopy study, they're going to look at your stool under the microscope for dead yeast. And if they find dead yeast, you can be guaranteed that means you have Candida, because that dead yeast was alive not too long ago. And 90% of the time, any yeast you find in your gut is a Candida species. But we also found parameters in the modern stool test that will tell you have Candida if it's not showing up. One is a very high intestinal pH, because the Candida proliferates in an intestinal pH above 7.2. Typically, your typical Candida patient will have intestinal pH of 7.5 or higher. You want to look for an absence of short-chain fatty acids or a deficiency of butyrate, because butyric acid is your intestinal tract's natural antifungal, and when that's low, Candida will tend to grow. You want to look for elevated calprotectin, because that's an immune response and an inflammatory response you're getting from having Candida. If you do a stool test and everything looks okay, but your calprotectin's elevated, that's insane, because what's causing that to be elevated? Something is causing an inflammatory response. And again, if you have all this other criteria lined up, it's most likely going to be Candida. And then you look for other bacteria that are typically found with Candida. You look for H. pylori, look for Klebsiella, and then you look at your flora, your commensal flora. You want to look to see if you have enough of the three basics. The three basic bacteria that protect you are the friendly strains of E. coli, Lactobacillus acidophilus, and bifidus. If any of those three are missing, if you have a high intestinal pH, if your calprotectin's high, if your butyrate is low, you can be pretty much guaranteed you have Candida, even though it's not showing up on the test. And I recently wrote a manual on this, which we're going to market it to doctors on the proper interpretation of these stool tests as far as Candida goes. Because if you understand these patterns and you understand what's happening, you can catch Candida in your patients when it says you don't have it. which is usually not going to be true.
So how many, I mean, like what percentage of the population in the US do you think has Candida?
At any given time, it's about 35%. And it's probably risen. This was as of a few years ago. It's probably risen because there are a lot of medications that cause Candida. Candida, for the most part, is iatrogenic. It's doctor-induced. It's medication-induced. Going back to Dr. Crook's book on Candida, he talked about antibiotics, and that's true. Even in the Merck manual says that the indiscriminate use of broad-spectrum antibiotics gives rise to chronic yeast infections and Candida. But antibiotics aren't alone in this. We know that antacids also can cause Candida because they neutralize your stomach pH, and that causes a domino effect going into your small intestine where the pH tends to then be too high, too alkaline. We know steroids and many hormone preparations cause Candida. Corticoid steroids will do it because they raise the glucose in your little blood vessels that the Candida sticks to. Estrogenic medications will cause Candida. Estrogen makes Candida grow. Estrogen makes babies grow. Estriol, particularly. If a woman's high in estriol, which is one of the 3 estrogens, that makes Candida grow. It makes babies grow. It makes cancer cells grow. It makes Candida grow. There are medications that also will cause Candida, even to some degree, some psychotropic medications, some psychiatric medications, Zoloft and Prozac and whatnot can imbalance your flora. Anything that imbalances your intestinal flora essentially can make Candida grow.
So when people are doing fasting, like particularly like 72-hour water fast or fast mimicking diet, and they're starving out, to some degree, they're starving out the dysbiotic microbes, right? And they're preferencing the eubiotic microbes that can sustain periods of fasting. How much could that help somebody that has Candida?
30%, 40%.
Okay. So then you would match that with supplementation, with doing
Yeah, because it's impossible for fasting to get rid of Candida because Candida taps into your blood vessels. It grows roots. That's how Candida causes intestinal permeability. It's by growing roots that break into your tiny blood vessels looking for sugar. So it's able to stay alive. As long as you're alive, it will stay alive. And then the fun part is what actually the strange thing about Candida is that the main use it has, when you look at it, when you really do a very detailed study of Candida, embalming fluid is essentially antifungal. Embalming fluid is nothing more than a big zap of antifungal medication. Formaldehyde is antifungal, it's antimicrobial. And what it's doing is it's destroying the Candida that would naturally decompose your body when you die.
Because it's just going to keep eating.
Yeah. And you have all these people out there, and you see the interesting thing about Candida, it produces such a spectrum of symptoms because of its metabolism. Candida releases mycotoxins, which are fungal-related toxins. It releases alcohols in large amounts. In fact, there's a species of Candida called Candida auris, which is from Japan, that can produce so much alcohol that it can make you legally intoxicated.
Oh my gosh.
And people have used this as a defense in DUI cases because they didn't have a drink and they were intoxicated, and it was from this strain of Candida. Candida releases neurological toxins, which affect autistic kids. Candida can produce such a wide array of toxins, besides not even taking into account how it affects your mitochondrial function and your neurological function, because it's something that goes hidden. People don't consider it, you see. People will come up with all these other reasons why they're ill, and the doctor will give them all of these medications to cover up their symptoms before they will ever think this could be the root of the problem. They're overlooking a couple of things that happens with the person. I'll give you an example now. If someone works in the field of remediation, mold remediation, if you go into a house where there's like 7 people and you're remediating this house, there's always going to be 1 or 2 that are the most affected. And there's going to be other people in the house who say, yeah, I mean, I blow my nose once in a while, I sneeze, but it doesn't really bother me that much. But there's going to be a couple of people in the house who are devastated by the house. When they leave the house, they feel like a different person. They go back in the house and they're crashed.
My neighbor, it's like her and one of her sons had it. The spouse and the other son weren't affected at all.
Those are the people who have Candida.
It's because their immune system's already just fighting. Like they're already just trying to absorb nutrition, and it's okay.
And they're getting overloaded by the mycotoxins that are in the air in the house because they already have their own Candida producing mycotoxins. So they're already crashed from having Candida. And now when you add the mycotoxins from the mold in the house, it just knocks them down further. That's why they're crashing and the other people are relatively okay. You can also tell a Candida patient is how they react to sugar and how they react to carbs. When they're craving the stuff all the time, but when they eat it, then they have all their symptoms flare up within about 24 hours, as opposed to the person who's not necessarily carb or sugar crazy. And he can take it or leave it. He eats it. He's okay. Because Candida can produce at least 150 different symptoms.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? It's like
You know,
anyone reading the list, everyone's going to be like, "Oh, I've got it," because you're going to have some symptom on that list, or you might.
yeah, but
Right.
you have to have a few of them, and there has to be some kind of pattern. Like, do those symptoms flare up when you eat the wrong foods that would feed Candida? Do those symptoms flare up when the humidity and then the temperature is higher, because that's when Candida becomes more active, just like any other mold? Do those symptoms flare up when you like coincidental, like if you look at like a baby's vaccine or a young kid's vaccine schedule, did he start to get these symptoms flaring up after the vaccines took place? Speaking of vaccines, one of the interesting things that I noticed back when COVID broke out is I had a lot of patients who had completed my treatment years ago who were coming back, and they were saying, gee, I feel like the Candida is coming back. I don't know what happened. I was doing fine.
Yeah.
And I ended up, in questioning them, I ended up finding out that they got vaxxed. And then a study came from Japan. The Japanese study said that the spike protein in COVID will destroy bifidus bacteria in your colon, which is essentially the mechanism of how you get Candida anyway. Instead of it being an antibiotic, it's a spike protein. But this holds true for somebody, whether it's the vax or just getting COVID. COVID, because of the spike protein, will cause Candida. And it makes you wonder if that's what long COVID may be about. In my practice, I have found long COVID is either one of two things. It's not a continuation of COVID, because I've tested people and they were continue to be negative. Long COVID is either the person got Candida from COVID or they have adrenal exhaustion from having COVID.
So it's the COVID, it's not the vaccine, or it's the vaccine, it's not COVID that's causing it's the
Yeah,
vaccine
it's the spike protein.
from the vaccine. It's not from
Well, you can get the spike protein from the vax, or you can get it from just having COVID.
okay, so it's either way.
Either way. And despite Dr. Fauci is very funny. I saw a lecture of his where he said that the spike protein leaves your body after 2 weeks. Well, I would say add to that 1 year and 12 months or so, because I have patients who still have tested. You can now get a blood test for the spike protein. I've seen people have the spike protein in their body for 2 years. So there was another falsehood.
Yeah. So in terms of testing, can people do testing at home and get results and then talk to you? Or is it that, how are you advocating people get testing?
Well, when it comes for Candida, we have a few different ways. It depends, because some tests are better for one Candida patient than another. You can do a stool test, and if the stool test has all the correct options on it, you can figure out if they have Candida, and you can actually get a lot of knowledge on that, because you can see how their whole microbiome is allowing the Candida to be there. There's that. If you just want to know whether or not you have a Candida overgrowth, you can do an organic acid test. You can look for arabinol and some of the other markers, and if those are elevated, you have Candida. And we also have a test that's exclusive to my office that we use with our patients. It's a test they can take at home and get results within 10 minutes that will show their level of Candida activity, and also the activity of any bacteria and parasites in their system. So those are useful. What's that one?
What is that one called?
Well, that's our own test. So we don't really have a name. Well, we have an in-office name for it, but it's not commercially available. So no one's really
Candida test.
Yeah, that's what we call it.
Got it. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Let me warn people about blood work.
Yeah.
Blood work is not that accurate for Candida, and it's because most of the blood work that you're going to do for Candida involves looking at your antibodies, and your antibodies can be elevated for 8 or 9 months longer than you actually have Candida. So if a person goes on a successful program to eliminate Candida and they get their blood tested, they could be really upset because it's going to show their antibodies are still high, and that's kind of normal. It's like that way with viruses. You can get a blood test for Epstein-Barr virus, and you'll see certain antibodies will be high years after you recover. That's just your body's memory of having had it, and your body is still on defense. So you have to wait at least a year after you feel you've gotten rid of Candida for the blood test to be accurate.
Yeah. And so symptoms that people will have will be all over the map. Do you want to go through some of the, I guess, most surprising symptoms of people who don't maybe relate to having Candida?
Let's do two things. Let's go over the initial progression that usually happens, and then we'll hit on that. Usually when a person first develops Candida, their energy crashes. That's the first thing. They are tired for no apparent reason, and they'll notice their digestion's not so good. They're bloated, they're gassy, they could be constipated or having diarrhea. They start to have memory problems, cognitive problems, and they can start reacting allergically and strangely to odors and fumes in their environment where never before they did. They could develop rashes like eczema. They could start getting asthma reactions, and then they can just start generally reacting to everything. That's what we used to call the universal reactor, and that's what happens when you have bad leaky gut syndrome. You just become chemically intolerant of everything. They could start getting arthritic symptoms where they never had these things before. When we get into the arthritic symptoms, that was one of the surprises people would never expect. They
Yeah.
would never expect arthritis to be as a result of Candida, but it often is. Chronic sinusitis is another symptom of Candida. Obviously, vaginal yeast infections
Well, is it
chronically
just
are.
gonna just attack like in Ayurvedic medicine? There's a word, I don't know what it is in allopathy, but it's called kavaigunya, and it's like the weak place in the body. It's like the dead space in the body. Sometimes it's genetic or ancestral. Sometimes it's just due to the person's personal health history. Is that
You
like you
nailed it.
find it like it just goes to the
You totally nailed it. That's exactly what happens. And that's the other interesting thing about the COVID vaccine, too. That's something that the COVID vaccine and Candida have in common, is they both attack whatever your weaker areas are. So with the
Mhm.
COVID vaccine, if arthritis runs in your family and people usually get it at 70 years old, you
Mhm.
start to get it at 30 years old. That's the sneaky thing about what the vax does that's bad. But
And it's
Candida
just
is the same thing.
and it's literally like, so how does that work? So with arthritis, it's like literally like creating inflammation in the joints that is
It's the mi
diminishing the ability for the cartilage to regenerate.
Yeah, it's that simple. It's the mycotoxins causing inflammation. Essentially, that's what's happening.
Mhm.
It's not very complicated. It's very simple. And when you test those people, you want to look at their ANA levels. You find if their ANA is elevated and their RA is elevated, you know, boom, that's it.
Mhm.
So
Okay. Got it. Sorry, I interrupted, but keep going.
no,
Because these are some of the things that, in this allopathic mindset, I feel like that many of us are raised in. It's like if you have a disease, then here's the medicine for that disease. Whereas, like in Ayurvedic medicine, it's you look at the nature of the individual and then you look at the nature of the imbalance. And so it's a little bit more specific. Here you're saying like arthritis. Well, the arthritis, you're not just treating arthritis with like a hip replacement surgery or a joint replacement surgery. You're actually looking at like what's the underlying cause of the degeneration, and is that caused by candida, like such a non, for many of us, a very non-linear path to even think through.
well, yeah, unfortunately, as RFK Jr. would tell you, we've been brainwashed in this country to think this disease, this medicine. And what
Mm-hmm.
is the medicine doing? The medicine's not addressing the cause. The medicine is just suppressing symptoms.
Right.
I went to naturopathic school. When naturopathic school, we're taught to look for a cause. The first thing, the first day, first hour that I was in school, the first thing the teacher said is there's a cause and a reason for everything. There's no mystery. He says there are no mysteries. There are only truths that haven't yet been discovered. So there is a cause, and that naturopaths are taught to look more for the cause, where in allopathic medicine, it's actually a crime in many different states to say that you could cure certain illnesses. That's a big, but as far as the surprises that people are faced with when they have Candida, I have heard the most bizarre stories in my life I never would believe. There was this person once who had these strange headaches, and they couldn't figure out what the headaches were from. But we looked at her menstrual cycle, we looked at all these different things, couldn't figure out what it was from. And then we found out that the person who lives next door to her had some kind of a business where she was making these different arts and crafts, and she had to use different cultures like aspergillus and different things like this in order to grow certain chemicals that she used to make the
Wow.
culture. So
Wow.
when the windows were open and the wind was blowing, the mold toxins would come into her apartment. She would get hit with them. It would trigger the headaches, these horrible migraines.
Oh,
And there you go. Now, who would have ever thought that?
right. Right.
We
And
had a kid, we had a kid once who every time he went to the dentist, he broke out in a rash,
Mm.
regardless of what happened. And we tested his mercury levels. His mercury was off the graph. So every time he went to the dentist and they cleaned his teeth or they did something, they disrupted those fillings, some mercury leaked out, and then it flared up his candida. So you
So
constantly, there are like these points where you have to be a detective. sometimes to figure out what it, once you know it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense once you know. But
Yeah.
until you know, it's a mystery until you figure it out. Then it's obvious.
So with and then the percentage of people that have Candida that's out of control, they also have H. pylori, like that's, or not always.
No, not always. It's a small percentage, but you can identify them because they'll be some of your toughest cases.
It's just resistant. The body's just, yeah. And then the Candida is mutating.
Yeah.
Got ya. All right. So if everyone is listening, like that's thinking like I must have Candida, right? So now they need to get tested, right? And so if we look at,
Here's the worst thing they could do is in a way, the worst thing you can do is self-treat. But although it's definitely their right to, and they're better off self-treating than they are just sitting there waiting for their doctor to come and save them, because the odds are is the doctors are not going to come. Doctors are very, how would I put this, if I want to just say this delicately, very sensitive about the subject of Candida. And it's hard to find a doctor who can actually look at it and be open-minded and clear-headed about it. I constantly get people asking me, why don't doctors know about this? Why don't doctors do anything about it? Well, first off, if 50% of your practice and your income was giving people antibiotics that cause Candida, how willing do you think you would be to want to take a good look at this subject? Now, if the doctor was to assume responsibility and say, well, I'm going to help my patients with Candida, just going over the diet, explaining the diet alone is going to take 20 minutes. The average medical doctor spends 5 minutes or less with a patient. Right. He doesn't have time. He has to hire someone in his office who's going to deal with Candida patients. And then the questions they have, you'll get phone calls all day long. Can I have puffed rice?
Right.
Is it okay? Is it okay if I have this or that? Doctor doesn't have time to get on the phone with all these people. So it's a tremendous deterrent for them to want to address this. Plus the fact that they're going to come up with going through everything I went through when I first tried to figure this out. They'll be putting people on nystatin and all these, Sporanox, all these drugs, and they're going to have these people relapsing all the time. So it's a huge headache. So this is how
it's just easier to not deal with it.
Yeah, it is. Or refer them to somebody else. Like go find a nutritionist.
So I feel like in the last, I don't know, week or two, I just keep meeting a lot of people that are on the carnivore diet, whether it's through my podcast or through clients. I live in Montana part-time and there's a lot of ranchers. So if we look at something like people that are just eating meat, right? Just in a way to like simplify the potential, it's like the ultimate elimination diet for some way. So if someone was on the carnivore diet, would they see what would happen with Candida?
It would reduce, and they would reduce it down probably to the point where they'd put it in a remission.
Okay. So that would be for someone who just isn't going to do the testing and is just going to experiment. You like that might be an experiment better than trying to fill in the gap with a bunch of supplements.
Yeah, it might be. We want to take into account the blood type of the person. If the person is a blood type O, he's most likely a carnivore anyway. And blood type O's can be somewhat susceptible to Candida. So if he goes on a carnivore diet and feels better, then you have to figure out whether or not it's because he's doing a diet that's more akin to his blood type, or whether or not it's the Candida. Or not worry about it and just say, well, I feel better doing this way. And
right.
That's the deal.
Yeah.
Blood type A is more of a surprise because A's make a toxic mess, to quote Dr. Diadamo, out of eating a lot of meat. So they may, if a type A feels much better on a carnivore diet, I'd be very suspect that they have Candida.
Okay. And then what diet? So tell me about when you're testing people, they come up with Candida, what's the diet you're recommending?
Well, we have a bunch. We have about 8 different diets, depending on them, some more precisely, but essentially all Candida diets are the same. They're all low carb, low sugar diets. They all resemble the Zone diet or the Atkins diet or the Paleo diet. And they have to be that way because what feeds Candida is starch and sugar. There is no food that you're going to eat that's going to cure Candida. There's no food that cures it. There are only foods that feed it and make it worse or make it grow, and those foods are carbs and sugars. So if a person goes on a diet that's low in carbs and sugars, that aids in the elimination of it.
And then what's the relapse for people that, let's say, that do stick to the anti-Candida diet? Like, what do you see aside from I guess with COVID and with the vaccine, there was relapse with a bunch of people. Anything else
In my practice, the relapse rate is low because my program actually gets rid of Candida, and we document that by the testing. The challenge becomes getting the person's friendly bacteria to fully come back.
Mm-hmm.
And because that's what guards you against it coming back. And the things that work against you there are, do they have leaky gut syndrome? Because when you have leaky gut, probiotics can't stick either. So if you cure their leaky gut, then you have other things you have to look at. And one of the first things we look at in a case where we've gotten rid of the Candida and we've got them on probiotics is we look to find out what may have caused their susceptibility. Did they just get overloaded or overwhelmed by antibiotics or some kind of medication, or do they have themselves a personal weakness that is allowing them to be susceptible? And usually what we find is those people are high arsenic, high mercury, high copper, high iron. There's usually toxic metals there, not so much toxic chemicals, although toxic chemicals can do it too, but we're more worried about toxic metals because toxic metals interfere with your body's ability to eliminate toxic chemicals. So that makes it the senior problem. And very often you find there's a person is copper toxic, iron toxic, mercury, arsenic, aluminum toxic. Those are the key ones that will cause Candida. They also could be very deficient in zinc, molybdenum, and selenium that can help the Candida. Mostly their susceptibility is with, if you're not talking about a diabetic, like so diabetic obviously is at risk for Candida because his sugar is always so high.
Yeah.
And it's feeding the Candida already naturally in his body. If you're dealing with somebody with immunosuppression, you have immunosuppressed people, diabetics, right out of the gate, tough cases because they have these pre-existing problems.
Yeah.
But for people not in those situations, you want to look at toxic metals as being perhaps something that's participating in this. And you've got to be careful when you test them for those metals because the metals hide in your tissues.
Don't they show up in hair or no?
Hair is the best. Hair is the best. The best lab is Trace Elements Inc. in Texas. But a combination of tests is usually the best thing because sometimes it doesn't show in the hair because they're such bad detoxifiers, they can't mobilize the metals. The metals get stuck in certain tissues. There's compartmental storage of the metals. In certain tissues, they can't mobilize it enough even to show in the hair or show in the urine. So sometimes you have to look for patterns in the hair that could imply metals are hidden. Andy Cutler has some really good work on that. There are different doctors who've looked into this. There's one doctor, particularly a medical doctor, whose son had asthma. He chelated his son for 2.5 years before any mercury showed up in his urine. This boy was such a bad detoxifier.
Wow. Wow.
So the metals are a problem, but when you get somebody who's really a bad detoxifier, the first thing you got to do before you really worry about the metals is try to improve their methylation, try to improve their detoxification so you can get the metals moving and even find them. Because sometimes you won't. I have to admit those are rare. Those aren't the typical cases. The typical case, you're going to test the person, boom, the metals will be right there.
In the hair sample.
Yeah, rhenium is a problem for people who live more like in the West, like Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, that whole area. It's from the nuclear testing.
From nuclear testing. Yeah.
We get patients with really elevated uranium who come from that area. The first concern you have with uranium is kidney function because it can damage your kidneys. But uranium, even though this is inert, like this is not like these people are radioactive and glowing in the dark. It's called dead. I think it's called DEDUR is what they call it, which is dead uranium. It's inert. It's not radioactive anymore. But the element itself can still hurt your kidneys, and it can also spread Candida.
So in terms of testing, like for people who maybe have a number of different symptoms that they can't get to the bottom of, like, what do you recommend in terms of just general testing protocol?
I would say ask your doctor. Hopefully he's a functional doctor. Ask him to do what I call a modern stool test on you. Not something you send to LabCorp. A stool test from one of the more cutting edge labs like Diagnostech or Mosaic Labs or Doctors Data, Genova, one of the more modern labs where you're going to have a better chance of finding the Candida because they're going to look for DNA and they're going to look for all the patterns I spoke about earlier. Or get an organic acid test done. And because in all the organic acid tests, there is a mycology panel and a dysbiosis panel. and they should be able to find elevated organic acids from Candida there. And that would tell you that's a really good start, getting those tests done.
And what about companies like Viome or other microbiome testing companies?
They're good. Biome is good.
Okay. And would they be able to detect Candida?
Yeah, if you get the right test. If you get the more comprehensive stool test. I don't know if Viome does an organic acid test, but that would be the way to go. You just want to make sure you're getting, when you're doing a stool test, it's always a great thing to find out if they do a microscopy study that looks for dead yeast, because that's a dead giveaway right there.
Yeah. And how far, I just am curious in general with testing, how, with more of this direct to consumer, with like people being able to get more of their information directly without a doctor, right? Like Viome is a good example of that, where you can just sign up, they send you a kit, you pee, you send it in, they give you the results directly, and there's not the doctor middleman for the information. Yeah. Where do you see that go? Like, where is that working in your opinion? Where do you see it going?
I think it's a great thing, because I'm a firm believer. I'm a libertarian, so I'm a firm believer in people being able to access data and getting data on their own without having to subscribe to any particular obligation to a doctor. You should have the right to do lab work and to have this lab work. But you bring up a good point. So when the person has this lab work, if they study this and they see there are indications there that there is a problem, they should then take that lab work to the practitioner of their choice and get properly treated. I mean, it's good for that right there. If you suspect you have a problem, you get the lab work done and see if you're right. And then if you're right, take the lab work to a qualified practitioner who can help you.
Yeah. So in Candida Chronicles and on your website, health-truth.com, people that are treating Candida, or people that you're treating for Candida, how much? So what I'm hearing is it depends on the severity. Their treatment plan would depend on the severity, and then it would depend on their blood type.
Let me say this. When you read my book, my book explains that we have 5 phases that the Candida patient goes through. We have phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Everybody with Candida goes through all those phases, because if they don't, the Candida will come back. Now, it's the intensity of each phase depends on how severe they are. The structure of the treatment remains the same, in that in phase 0, we start out with a bowel cleanse to get rid of parasites and get rid of the surface layers of their dysbiosis. In phase 1, we address the Candida systemically using rotated botanicals that kill the Candida all over your body. Phase 2, we concentrate on killing the Candida really deep in your gut, because that's the Candida that repels the probiotics. Second part of phase 2 is to replenish the probiotics. Phase 3 is to assess your toxicity. Do you have metal toxicity, chemical toxicity? Next part of phase 3 is to correct your deficiencies. Phase 4 is to repair your immune system. So everybody goes through that structure, because that's the order that I found that it works in. I did it all wrong. In my earlier career, I treated people all wrong. And I learned the hard way, what's the way that really works. So everybody goes through that structure. It's just how intense it is depends on what the severity is. So the more severe the Candida is, the more intense all those lower phases to remove the Candida is going to be. The more heavy metals they have, the more intense the phase 3 is going to be to detox those metals. So,
and you're going to see that on the lab test, and that's how you know the severity and the treatment.
Yeah, Rosetta Stone for me is lab work, because if you don't have lab work, you don't know what you're doing. I get a kick out of some of these multi-level marketing companies I see on social media. If you do this, you're going to get rid of Candida in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. That's nonsense, because first of all, they don't have a test showing you had Candida to start. They don't have a follow-up test showing you ever got rid of it. So who knows, that their product might have helped you. You might have felt better. Could be for a million reasons.
Yeah. Right. And that kind of brings you back to the whole supplementation and people just kind of grabbing at straws. That's what it sounds like.
Well, there's a whole other story that I missed on when you were asking me before about the strange things that can happen. We've had people who took certain supplements, and we found this out in retrospect, that they had bizarre reactions because they were taking certain supplements that either were further imbalancing them or was aggravating their Candida. And we had a heart patient once who came and he said, I don't know what's wrong. I keep getting these weird muscle weaknesses, and I don't know why that's happening. What's going on? And we tested him, and we found his CoQ10 levels were really low. And he said, I don't understand this. I take 300 milligrams of CoQ10 every day. And we tested his Candida levels. His Candida was raging. We got rid of his Candida, didn't give him any CoQ10, and his CoQ10 levels elevated.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
If you look at the organics test, is a great example of this. I very typically will do the entire panel of the organics test on a new patient. And when they have candida, we will get rid of their candida, and then when they're getting into phase 3, we do the organics test again to find out what's going on, what changes they have. And we're mainly doing it to look at their arabinose and all the candida markers. They'll come up at this point with the candida's gone, and 70% of what was wrong on the test before is now corrected. And we didn't give them anything. We didn't give them any of the supplements. All we did was get rid of their candida, and 70% of the rest of the test just handled itself. It just normalized because the candida was gone.
Yeah. Wow. How many? Yeah. So I'm just curious, like, how many people are you seeing a year, and how many of them have candida?
Well, we see about between 50 to 60 people a week, and they virtually all have candida. Most, I would say it's almost 90%, because that's what people come to me for.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of people with candida.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're just seeing the numbers going up every year because more and more people are vaccinated and on medications. And the more people are on medications, then the more people are going to have candida, or the more people that have vaccinations, the more people that will have candida.
And then the more the data is on the internet, the more people will become aware of it. And the more people hear podcasts that I'm on, the more people are aware of it. I would say it's all those factors.
Yeah. Well, I'm so appreciative of our conversation, and I will read the Candida Chronicles. I'm going to point people back to your website, health dash.
And there's also the New York City Candida doctor and the New York City thyroid doctor. And people always ask me, why do you have a thyroid website? Well, Candida and thyroid are really heavily related. They're so related that I had to develop a website on thyroid to explain the relationship between Candida and thyroid. There's a lot about thyroid function that most doctors don't know about. Dr. David L. Watts from Trace Elements, the hair analysis lab, made some heavy breakthroughs in understanding thyroid problems in terms of trace minerals. And essentially there was a book written many years ago by Dr. I don't remember the name. The book was called Hypothyroidism, the Unsuspected Illness by Broda Barnes. That's who it was, Broda Barnes. Broda Barnes was the first to talk about body temperature and thyroid, how you should check your temperature, and that reflects your thyroid function. Well, we found out what that's all about with Dr. Watts's work. Dr. Watts is able to determine in a hair analysis some key ratios between minerals that will govern your thyroid function. In Guyton's book of physiology, Guyton said himself that in some ways we don't know fully yet. Calcium acts as a governor for sensitizing your tissues to the effects of thyroid hormones, while potassium sensitizes the tissues. So in Dr. Watts's work, we found a potassium to calcium ratio and zinc to copper ratio that will show you how sensitive your tissues are to your thyroid hormones. And if those ratios are really bad, you are one of those, you're one of those stereotypical people whose body temperatures are consistently below 97.8. They have every symptom in the world of low thyroid, yet their blood tests look okay, and the doctor's giving them thyroid medication and it's still not working. And that's why. It's because those mineral ratios are off. So the tissue sensitivity to the thyroid hormone isn't there. You can take the hormone, but your tissues, in a sense, are rejecting it or not allowing it to work. It's not pulling it in. And it's not working. And this is another thing Candida does. Candida affects those mineral ratios. It causes your copper to run high, zinc low, calcium to run high, potassium low. So in that case, and you can eat as many bananas as you want. It's not going to fix that, because it's not a point of your dietary mineral intake. It's a point of how your body is regulating those minerals in your tissues. And that's largely hormonal.
So it's interesting. It's like, because you've seen so much volume and so much testing, you're able to see the patterns so much more quickly then, right?
You can anticipate the patterns when you start hearing people, their history.
Like it all maps out. And so then how long, for someone who's just moderate, we'll say not severe, how long does the treatment take?
About a year and a half.
Wow. And when do they start feeling better?
It could be any time.
And then I'm just curious, because it's everywhere, right? And doesn't everybody have Candida, but just not dysbiotically, or not with dysbiosis?
That's the big argument you end up when you start talking to medical doctors. Their catch line is everybody has Candida. We don't care about everybody having Candida. We care about overgrowth. We're worried about an excess of Candida where it's dominant, and now it equals dysbiosis.
And so how much does the testing cost for someone to know?
I would say that the The organic acid test is somewhere around, depends on how you get it done from where, but it's somewhere like around maybe $400, 500. These modern stool tests are running about the same. Depends on how many add-ons you put on. Like if you get one of these modern stool tests and you add on zonulin for leaky gut and some other things, the price goes up to 600 or something, but it's generally in that area, four to $500.
And then how much is the treatment protocol?
Well, that depends.
Like
Moderate case, probably $300 to $400 a month.
Yeah, got it. I think that's just helpful for people to wrap their mind around, right? And then if we look at the long-term damage that Candida is doing, right?
Well, usually these people are jumping from doctor to doctor and they're on all these medications to cover up their symptoms and they still don't know what's wrong. So I feel bad for the patients who know what's wrong. They know they have Candida and they can't shake it because they've been treated incorrectly to the point where their Candida has mutated so much it's so drug resistive or even herb resistive. Those are the people who just really need to walk a tight line when they do the treatment. Otherwise, it's going to be hard. The minor slip-ups set them back too far in those cases.
Yeah. So it sounds like a really good opportunity to put, for those who have a HSA, to put those dollars to work.
I would agree. It's true. At least they'll be going to, you can go to the hospital, get misdiagnosed, mistreated, and spend $10,000, $20,000.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm so glad we had a chance to talk. I just want to point people to your website again, health-truth.com. Thanks so much for being here, Dr. Biamonte.
It was absolutely my pleasure.
All right, you guys. Hello, listeners. So I have created for the wellness pros out there who listen to this show, the Wellness Pro Launchpad, and I'll get you in for free. Just go to wellnesspro.academy /Launchpad, LAUNCHPAD, Launchpad, and then just fill out the form and we'll get you right into this school classroom in here. And in the Launchpad, it's really cool. Like you get to see yourself as the hero in the path of the Wellness Pro, and then your client's transformation in A to B, and your vibe and your brand, your investment story, and design the journey for your clients, patients, or students, and then how to price from results. So these lessons are super short. They're each about 10 minutes, and you'll have a reframe on how to launch and scale the next phase of your wellness career. So wellnesspro.academy /Launchpad, and then and on the inside, if you really want to launch, you can, like your next phase of growth as a wellness pro, then you can talk to me. See you soon.